Unless we build it now. United States, Africa, we salute ya. A new state of mind, I introduce ya. Close your eyes and visualize the rise of a new paradigm. Solar powered skyscrapers.
Welcome to the Africa Must Unite podcast, a podcast dedicated to inspiring African people worldwide to rise up, organize, and struggle for Pan-Africanism, a unified, liberated, socialist Africa, the only permanent solution to the exploitation and oppression of African people, no matter where they happen to be born or happen to live in the world. Now please, welcome the hosts of Africa Must Unite.
Africa's future is now, so get ready.
Greetings. I'm Brother Maurice.
And I'm Brother Neil.
This is Africa Must Unite podcast, and we are the Pan-African Revolutionary Socialist Party, also known as PRSP. Let's take a look at a couple of important dates in the history of African people and other progressive people. The first date in connection of Women History Month happened on March 5th, 1960, when African women, textile workers, led a strike in racist South Africa in protest against slave labor. Also on March 6th in 1957, our leader, the person who we base our party's ideology and work on, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, led Ghana to gain political independence from British colonialism. In relation to today's theme of the new tactics of the enemy, we want to take a look at a current event happening now in Haiti. And I'm going to pull this article or current event from the People's Dispatch. The title of this article is Kenya halts its police deployment to Haiti after resignation of de facto prime minister. The government of President William Ruto has suspended the deployment of 1,000 Kenyan police officers as part of a U.S.-backed mission to Haiti. The news followed a day after Haiti's de facto prime minister, Ariel Henry, announced his resignation to pave the way for the appointment of a quote-unquote transitional presidential council amid rising insecurity in the country. Shortly after the de facto prime minister and president of the Caribbean country, Ariel Henry, announced his decision to resign on March 11, Abraham, and I'm struggling with his name, Abraham Correa Singh A, the principal secretary of Kenya's foreign ministry, stated on March 12th that the deployment would be contingent on the ground situation. And the critical ground situation is that there has to be an authority that can be the basis for police deployment that enjoys constitutional authority in Haiti. Henry had assumed power in the aftermath of the assassination of former President Jovenel Moise in July 2021. The transition which took place without the consent of the Haitian people, who at the time had been organizing mass protests against Moise's attempts to prolong his term in office, was quickly sanctioned by Western powers, including the United States. Now, just to sum it up real quickly, the United States announced $200 million in funding for the mission, announcing an additional $100 million on March 11, while the Bahamas, Bangladesh, Barbados, Benin, and Chad formally notified the United Nations of their intention to provide personnel for the deployment. Progressive forces within the country, particularly the Communist Party of Kenya, had adamantly rejected the deployment, reiterating that Haiti requires no foreign intervention. This crisis is orchestrated by the core group of the United States, Canada, and France, aiming to maintain hegemony and settle scores with Haiti for its historic slave revolution against French rule. In conclusion, the people on the ground, the masses on the ground in Haiti and the masses on the ground in Kenya are both organizing against neocolonial forces that put people in the power or people gain power, like Jimmy Barbecue, a former police officer, who also have warned that Haiti would be plunged into further chaos if the international community chooses a small group of politicians to negotiate with them on paper to decide who can be president, and what kind of government. This concludes today's current event.
Uh, Thanks a lot, Brother Maurice, and I think that's an excellent example of what we're talking about today. And I'm going to talk about Haiti a little bit later um, in the broadcast. But now I want to read from the calendar our theme for this month, which is the new tactics of the enemy. In the calendar, we said that Kwame Nkrumah, in his path-breaking book, Neocolonialism, The Last Stage of Imperialism, tells us that military aid is the last stage of neocolonialism. Today's neocolonialists have taken their militarism to new levels. It is no longer sufficient for them to use puppet African military functionaries to carry out the will of the Western neocolonialists. Today, these imperialists must directly insert their militaries into Africa. And in order to do this, they play a deadly double game. They, chiefly the United States, France, and Britain, and other major imperialists, have said that they are in Africa to defend the continent from quote unquote terrorists. Yet, when they smashed the revolutionary Pan-Africanist government of Libya, they freed these same so-called terrorists who had been locked up in Libya prisons. They armed them with Libya's highest level weaponry and then dispatched them throughout West Africa to destabilize the entire region. Once this destabilization began, they attempted to convince African leaders to accept larger numbers of troops, such as the U.S. AFRICOM forces, which are now based in almost every country in Africa, and some of the French forces as well. In addition, the weaponized financial warfare, which Nkrumah had also analyzed, has reached the highest stage. The United States has forced every country into a worldwide economic system which depends on the dollar, and which the U.S. Treasury Department also controls in terms of access to bank and systems of circulation and credit. Whenever any country attempts to become independent of that system, the U.S. and its allies impose crushing sanctions that isolate that country from the world's financial systems. Africa's unification, based on the continent-wide struggle for socialism, will defeat all these attempts at the continued domination of our people.
Wow, wow. And Brother Neil, as you was reading this, what came to mind was President Barack Obama. I wanted to ask you real quickly, can you speak, I guess, about Barack Obama connection to this, what you just shared in regards to Libya?
Yeah, well, yeah. In regards to Libya, a few things in terms of this, in the new tactics. Barack Obama, very interestingly, the first thing he did when he became a U.S. Senator, the very first thing he did as U.S. Senator was sponsor the resolution against Zimbabwe. So he has shown, he showed that he was coming in to move in a certain way against African interests. And he weaponized something that is part of the new tactic, something that's called humanitarian intervention. That is, we are supposedly intervening to help people to save the masses of Libya from Gaddafi, but the masses of Libya haven't known a day of peace since the fall of that country in 2011. So, and the country which had the highest standard of living in Africa, and which was on the path to build a unified African banking system, and working toward a unified Africa, now is in rubble. It's people are living in the street. Our people, African people, are being sold on slave markets, and no one talks about it anymore. But none of those same
Wow.
voices who promoted that talk about it anymore.
So, Brother Neil, how does Nkrumaism shine the way forward in the area of these new tactics?
Well, Nkrumaism shines the way forward in a couple of ways. First of all, it gives an accurate analysis of the problem and the dynamic nature of the problem. And the thing about Nkrumaism is that Nkrumaism is a method. It provides us with a method for analysis. So even as the situations change, we're able to look at these realities in their changing process and come up with some ideas of what's going on. The other thing that it does, it provides us with the tools, the political tools, the solutions to these problems. Therefore, what Nkrumaism does in terms of lighting the way forward, is to provide us both with a guide to theory as well as the linked practice that flows from that theory.
Okay. Who is the enemy and what do we mean by new tactics?
Yeah, it is a very important question because sometimes we get confused by the enemy. The enemy does as much as possible to confuse and hide itself from us, and so we end up fighting in the wrong places and whatnot. But to be clear, the enemy is basically capitalism in all of its manifestations. And by that, we talk about capitalism, imperialism, and neocolonialism. That is capitalism, that system of production for profit and exploitation. As it grows and matures, so to speak, it begins to spread around the world, imperialism, and it began to set up colonies all over the world. And then when that system was under attack, it had to shift to a system of neocolonialism, which made it appear that new countries, let's say in Africa, were now independent, when in fact they were still being run by the same imperialists through the control of their economic systems and through a sort of an alliance between the neo-colonial imperialists uh, with these local puppets. So what happens is that these this capitalism is responding to different uh, changes, and so each period that we enter, and each period as we go through a new period, they come up with new tactics and strategies, and we also have to come up with new tactics and strategies as well.
What are some of the new tactics and how do they come about today?
Well, first let's look at the history, kind of relatively recent history, maybe, I don't know, is that after World War II, you had a situation where you had uh, the United States being the leading capitalist power. The other capitalist power had been pretty much knocked down because of the war itself. Had been fought. Much of it had been fought in Europe. The Soviet Union, as a socialist country, had played a major role, really, in defeating Nazism in Europe, and you had a spread of socialism from now the Soviet Union. It was consolidated in China, and 1/3 of the world's people were under some form of socialism. And after that, you had the clamoring for independence, especially in Africa, but also in Asia, and these new countries, which were trying to become uh, to emerge, were in fact looking for something new, and many of them were attracted to this idea of socialism. So this Cold War was fought. Basically, a lot of times we think of the Cold War was fought primarily against the Soviet Union, and in some ways that's true. It was a battle against socialism, but the primary battlefield was in the so-called third world, in Africa, in Asia, and in South America and the Caribbean. And what that battle meant was that these new countries that were emerging, the imperialist countries wanted to shape the nature of those countries. They wanted to make sure that those new countries that emerged were going to continue to play the role of the colony. And so this is what we call neo-colonialism. They provided a fake leadership, kind of a fake independence, and had these puppet leaders or misleaders of our people, which basically kept our people enslaved. So now with this new period, we have something now. Now one would think that with the end of the Cold War, then and because that's the way that the U.S. used to talk about the Soviet Union was the main enemy. Now the main enemy had been defeated. It should have been an end to uh, warfare around the world, and there should have been quite a bit of peace. But in fact, after the end of the Soviet Union, after the collapse of socialism there, after the Russians now took the capitalist road, what we began to see is not some kind of peace, but we saw even more military interventions by the U.S. and its NATO allies. And this is because the key um, objective is to crush and to maintain this kind of neo-colonial rule, especially in Africa, but also in Asia and South America and so forth. So, in terms of the African uh, arena of this battle, it's one of the most important for the neo-colonialists because of the number of resources and because of the level of struggle that occurred in Africa. If you can think back, um, we began to see armed struggle throughout the southern um, uh, region of the continent. And all over that southern region, not only did you have armed struggle, but you had people clearly calling for calling for socialism. So you had to now begin this neo-colonialism at a higher level. And Nkrumah tells us that when you begin to see this high level of military aid, now you're looking at the last stage of neo-colonialism because we're talking about a direct confrontation between the masses of African people and the militaries of the U.S. and others. There was one military U.S. general who said he was talking about the rationale for AFRICOM. He was saying the battles that we see in Africa today represent the wars of tomorrow. So they were in fact putting together sort of a laboratory in terms of how they were going to move. And what's important in terms of this thing is that they began to play this game that we talked about, this deadly game, where they would uh, work alongside uh, some forces to create instability. Then they would tell the African leaders, hey, we need to stop this instability. And let me be a little more precise here. You had a couple of some of the leaders, not a couple, but some of the main strategists and thinkers in the U.S. political scene in terms of international thinking. At the end of the Cold War, they sat down, and here's a couple of things that they said. One, the first thing they said was that most of our intervention has been in those countries that have been called the Third World, Africa, Asia, and South America, and so forth. And in the future, that's where the bulk of our intervention is going to be. And since the bulk of our intervention is going to be there, we have to find a way to control the states, that is, control the military and the police forces in those areas, and make sure that we control them in a very tight manner. That's the first thing. The second thing they said was that we have to come up with a way to confuse the masses of the world's people and to stop any attempt at this kind of socialism, because socialism worldwide depends on people around the world hooking up, linking up, and seeing themselves as part of a kind of oppressed masses of the world. And so what they said, we will confuse people by making it appear to be a struggle over different forms of culture, what they call cultural conflict. And they were also beginning to pick out some very reactionary, conservative kinds of folks based on sort of this cultural conflict. So they would say, we're going to, for instance, in India, you know, they were talking about this Hindu nationalism that we now see coming to the forefront. That's really oppressing masses inside of India and so forth. And when they talked about Africa, they said, well, Africa doesn't have a culture that's a unifying culture, and in order to dominate Africa, we're going to use basically the most reactionary form of Islam that we can find. So they use the most reactionary forms and the most reactionary leaders in some of these countries. So in the Gulf countries, the countries that are run by they're run by basically monarchs, kings, and people who have absolute authority over their people. And but they also have a form of capitalism also, that they've become quite wealthy. These have become the people who now work with the neo-colonizing Americans and so forth to maintain control over Africa. But they get a slice of the pie, but they also had to do this because one of the things you see when the U.S. goes in, it doesn't do all the fighting by itself. When it went into Afghanistan, and other people, it bombed from the air, and it primarily had other folks doing the ground fighting. Same thing in Iraq, and same thing other places. So they have to do this thing. So now we begin to see throughout West Africa, East Africa, and the Sahel, and in the Horn, these what I call these sub-imperialists who are assisting the U.S., the Brits, the French, the European Union in the subjugation of our people. And there are land grabs going on all over the Sahel. There's enslavement going on in Sudan and elsewhere. And all of this is designed to make certain that Africa remains a place that is only giving up at the cheapest prices the raw materials which it has so much of. And to get those raw materials cheaply means that our people have to work and really work hard and die in those mines and things for maybe $2 a day, and that might be a good price. So that's what we're beginning to see, and so the U.S. encourages a certain a form of right-wing jihadism that comes all over West Africa, East Africa, and so forth. And then once that's started, then they come in and tell the countries that are under attack, hey, you're having a problem here. You need us to come in. We're specialists in here. We'll train your people and so forth. And we'll come in and try to control your militaries and whatnot. Or they don't tell them they're going to come in and try to control the militaries, but that is exactly what they're doing. We also need to look at the role of Zionism in this, excuse me, in this area, because one of the things we have to remember is that in the attempt to battle out of colonialism and at the same time battle against colonialism, we see those areas which were settler colonies of Namibia and South Africa. The Zionists played a major role in trying to keep those movements down. There was a major move in Liberia some years ago when you had a very progressive movement about to take place. And because the U.S. was tied down in Iraq, it was the Zionists who came in and squashed it. And so it also plays part of this role in terms of Africa. Lastly, the last thing that's going on here in this new tactics is this these sanctions and so forth. So we see that in places like Venezuela, where the masses have risen up and have begun to move in a progressive and socialist direction, you have crippling sanctions that really kill uh, the economy, make it almost impossible, and theft of the resources. I mean, Citgo oil. Citgo was owned by the Venezuelan government. The U.S. basically took Citgo oil companies, all gas companies all over the country, and gave them over to the reactionaries that are trying to overthrow those governments, and that money now going to them. Same thing and same thing. We see the same thing in Cuba and so forth. So and all over the continent, especially in Zimbabwe and so forth. So you have these sanctions that make it very difficult for people to develop a thriving economy, even when they want to move away from this capitalist domination. The dangerous thing to the imperialists, though, and the neocolonists, is that the more sanctions they built, the more organizing people do to develop alternative economic structures, and so for us, this is why Pan-Africanism, as Kwame Nkrumah called for, is so important, because that unification of Africa will allow us to break through any type of sanction. It won't be easy. It won't be overnight, but it will in fact provide us with that direction forward.
Brother Neil, this is a pretty scary scenario, man. What does Nkrumaism say about how we should deal with this?
Yeah, well, but Maurice, you're correct. It's a scary scenario, and we see the results of it on a daily basis. Our sisters, women, and young girls suffering all forms of rape and even young men sometimes forces all sorts of rape and sexual abuse and people being killed and having their limbs dismembered and etc. We see all of that, and we see, for instance, in and it's they do it in such a dastardly way. For instance, in Haiti, I wanted to mention Haiti just before I go into what Nkrumah says. In Haiti, there was a progressive government led by a gentleman by the name of Aristide, who's based in the masses of Haiti. The U.S. combined with a guy by the name of Guy Philippe, who led a coup supported by the U.S. to get Aristide out of the country. And this was during Bill Clinton's time. And Bill Clinton made sure that got Aristide out of the country. Later, that same Philippe was in U.S. prisons for drug dealing and money laundering and so forth. And just recently, he was let out of prison and he was sent back to Haiti. And now he has the same forces that he used, those same reactionary forces, to overthrow Aristide. He's back in charge of those same forces. So, what you see on TV is just black folks dying in the street and so forth, and killing and shooting, but you don't see the hand behind all of it, and the hand goes right back to the United States, to New York City capitalists and the Washington D.C. Politicians. So it's you don't see that hand, and people say, what's wrong with those folks? And we know what's wrong with them is this question of neocolonialism. Now, Nkrumah tells us, and he wrote about this and really throughout his life, but there are a couple of places where that really shine the light. One of these is class struggle. Class struggle in Africa, and also the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare. In the African arena of this struggle, Nkrumah says it's really critically important that we understand that none of us can stand against the system individually. And by individually, I mean in terms of one country here, one country there, and so forth. And even for us in the diaspora, we can't stand isolated from our brothers and sisters on the continent and in the rest of what we call global African world. We have to be part and parcel of it as conscious Africans and as conscious organized Africans. So Nkrumah tells us that in order to not be isolated, where they pick us off one at a time, we have to unify. And we have to unify with the idea, with the objective of creating a single unified African socialist nation, because it doesn't matter for us to unite under capitalism, which would mean that we'd have a handful of people who are making a little money and still in the interest of the imperialists and so forth, and the mass of our people still suffering and dying and being exposed to disease and so forth. So the first thing, we have to have a certain kind of unification, and this unification means we have to unify the revolutionary forces. And those revolutionary forces, he said, we must build something called the All-African Committee for Political Coordination, that we have to coordinate amongst ourselves, because if we can't build coordination and some form of unification or unity around the forces, the revolutionary forces, we can't unify our people. And there won't be a unified Africa. The other thing is that we have to build this African unification in the context of struggle. In the struggle, in what he calls the class struggle in Africa, as we begin to overthrow these systems of capitalism, neocolonialism, imperialism. We have to move those out of the way. We have to organize and bring together what he looks at as the rural and urban working classes and those revolutionary intelligentsia and so forth. All of that has to come together in the interest of the masses of our people. So this is what we have to do wherever we are. We have to struggle in a multi-form struggle in all of its form, protest, demonstration, putting out, educating of the people through mass work and so forth. So this is all of what we have to do. So he likes the way forward. It's clear it's not the easiest thing in the world to do, but it's necessary. There's no other way out at this point that's going to move our folks forward in a way that we can get to the point where we are truly free, truly independent, and on our way to real liberation and socialist development, where all of our people can eat and all of our people can have proper education, housing, health care, etc.
We have our work cut out for us. We truly do, man. All throughout 2024, at times with the help of invited guests, our focus will be on the 2024 theme of our calendar, Nkrumaism, shining the way forward through the crisis in today's African world.
So join us next month when we will discuss neo-colonial puppets.
Meanwhile, visit our website, Pan-African Revolutionary Socialist Party.org. Email us at panafricanrsp@gmail.com. Like us on soundcloud.com. Visit us on YouTube. Leave comments on www.facebook.com/Pan-African Socialist /.
Remember, organization is the key. Join us, the Pan-African Revolutionary Socialist Party, or some other revolutionary Pan-African socialist organization. A union of African socialist states is on the horizon and is coming closer and closer every day.
We the people are the ones who gonna have to fight. We used to say, which side are you on? Which side are you on? The truth is, we're in so much debt that the only way out is revolution or war. So now the question is, which side are you on?
Which side are you on, boy? Which side are you on, my God? Which side are you on, boy? Which side are you on, my God?
See, before I draw the line, let me welcome you close to all the folks who knew Obama sold the people a hoax. Gave the money to suckers while our community's still poor. Withdrew the troops but started another war. Colonizing, terrorizing, creating the oil crisis so they can make a kill on no food and gas prices. Prisons is filling, they trying to lock up the future. Militarized borders and control of computers. Rolling stupid bumping music that ain't healthy for the shortest. Privatizing schools and policemen in the hallways. Can't be dormant, I'm awoken, rise up, be ready. Brought the family with us and we hold the machetes.
Riding the fence, riding the fence. Too many people be riding the fence. Yeah, you say you ready for war, but are you convinced? I'm not convinced. If you're a rider, freedom fighter, crowd excited, then let's do this. We can make one big united, middle finger to the U.S. Give me the bravest and the truest. Fuck the hippest and the coolest. We gon' spark this revolution and cross this off our to-do list. Put your foot down if you look down on this criminal system. Put your book down and get shook down like my niggas in prison. Don't be condemning and condoning their actions in one sentence. Make up your mind, choose your side. Is you a patriot or a menace to society? So riot or sit by quietly. But don't pull out your flag and try to say you gon' ride with me. You flip-flopping like hip-hop. I don't get locked in that trick box. Get got like Big and Pop. Shit's got to stop. I am the people, not the big. I repeat after Fred. So please blow my brains out if I ever forget.
I'm with the independent thinkers. I'm down with the movers and the shakers and the ex-Henny drinkers, the non-smokers, the health advocates, the non-voters, the young bloods in the hood training like soldiers. I'm on the side of the tracks with the hood gardens, the little child that don't color inside the margins. I don't ride the fence, I cultivate my strength, cause if it ain't about power, it don't make sense. I've been down with Boogie Down since BDP, some brown pride, and black power make RBG. An OG told me choose battles wisely. In the struggle, don't forget your children and your wifey. If you don't see me on the podium preaching it, every day I hope my every action is teaching it. Cause revolution is a process, it's not a speech or a panel. You bite off more than you can handle.
Slingshots in Palestina, con todos los estudiantes por educación gratuita. I'm with workers uprising and the right to unionize. We ain't crossed the border, so you better legalize. I'm with La Peña del Bronx. I'm still with Vitor Toro, cause gentrification is polluting my borough. So bro never, South Bronx forever. Decolonize the block, make your neighborhood better. I ain't down with the rich, I'm more Richie Perez. Don't talk to grand juries or cooperate with feds. I'm with students, doctors, janitors, teachers. We need living wages, but they don't believe us. Monida, Barretto, Spofford, Hunts Point, my hood, I love. We join forces, forming our deck, BX. Taking over buildings, rebel Diaz for the children.
Politics to sickness, streets express symptoms. Caught up with a quickness, big business pimps them. Scholars play the simpleton, fools play with wisdom. Who will stand and fight back? Who will play the victim? Trials and tribulations, injured generations. Stolen history and outsourced innovation. Babel Tower fell, tribes are at war. The battle story's not represented in the score. The game's fixed, most of the faces and names switched. Credit stolen for art, science, religion, language, technology, philosophy, and what strange is. They paid in hatred for the knowledge of the ancients. Power in words, actions, guns, swords. Aim Panthers, brown berets, young lords. Pick a side, one sickness, one cure, one love, one blood, one world, but one war.